We have 4 days. We have 4 days until Thanksgiving. 4 days until turkey and travel and tension. 4 days before dishes and dysfunction and dialogue. 4 days before dessert and pies and, did we mention pies? 4 days before we begin to look for or long for a meal to share, either here in our dining and caring center or around our dining room table. Which means, of course, that we have 4 days until it's time for Thanksgiving grace. We all approach it in a slightly different way. That is, if we approach it at all. We all have our own unique traditions. For sometimes it's the youngest at the table who says it, and sometimes it's the oldest. Sometimes it's short, and sometimes it's long. Sometimes it's sung, and sometimes it's spoken. Sometimes it's profound, and sometimes it's silly. Sometimes it comes as an afterthought, and sometimes it comes only after thought. But whatever else it is, friends, we seem to know in our hearts that Thanksgiving is a day for grace. Whatever else we do on the other days of the year, for some reason we recognize that Thanksgiving is a day for grace. And this year, friends, it can't come too soon. After all, we live in a world in need of some grace. The good news is that we have plenty to go around. And so today, on this Thanksgiving Sunday, on this day when we welcome new members into our fellowship, on this day when we give from the abundance of our blessings, on this day when we commit our pledge to the year ahead, on this day of Thanksgiving, we pause to hear a story of grace. Today we hear one of the quintessential stories of the gospel. A story of grace, a story of a woman accused of adultery. Now, presumably, there was a man involved in this story as well, but as so often happens, even today, it's the woman who makes the story. In this case, she's dragged before God and neighbor in order to prove a point. To be clear, we don't know anything else about this woman. We're not told in the story if she was rich or poor, if she was free or slave, if she was Jew or Greek. We have no idea how her husband treated her, what her name was, or even if the act she was caught in was consensual. All we are told is that she was caught in the act. And in our story, the Pharisees and the scribes drag her to Jesus. As so often happens in episodes of public shaming, we know nothing else save her mistake. And they say to Jesus, ready to prove their point, they say, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. Now, according to the law, Moses tells us that women like this must be stoned. What do you say? Moses commanded that women like these should be stoned. What do you say? They were trying to get Jesus, to snag him, to get him caught in his own trap. And so they came up with this plan. They knew that according to the law of Moses, anyone caught in the act of adultery, man or woman, again, the man is absent, needed to be stoned to death. It is a harsh punishment, and they must have known. They must have recognized the harshness of the punishment. Why else would they bring it before Jesus? Why else would they use it to test him? They must have known. It must have sat uneasy with them, as it so often does when we choose law over love. They must have recognized that something was off. But they decided to move forward nonetheless. See, they wanted to get Jesus. If he advocated for keeping her safe, they would say that he was violating the law. And then on the other side, if he was to advocate for her stoning, they would say, look, what a harsh and legalistic man. Either way, they would leave him weaker than when they found him. And so, for political expediency's sake, they brought the challenge before him. The problem, of course, is that the challenge forgot about the human being at its center. As so often happens when we exploit tragedy for the sake of political gain, we forget about the real human suffering at its center. Certainly, we have learned that lesson this week. As our country and countries like us around the world have continued to debate about whether or not to allow in Syrian refugees, we have tended to forget that there is real human suffering here, that there are real people with real names and real needs and real pains that are at the center of this controversy. We seem to have forgotten that there are people at the center of this, people whose suffering is real and who are affected by the decisions that we make. As we talk about whether or not to help them as if it's some abstract issue, we forget that there are real people there who are hurting. And if we're honest, as Christians, friends, we know what we are called to do. As people who profess the name of Jesus Christ, we know in our hearts what we are called to do. We can't follow a faith that has one rule and one rule only: to love our neighbor as ourselves. We can't follow that faith and not know what we are called to do in this moment. A faith that calls us to love our neighbor, to love the foreigner among us, to love even our enemy. We can't pretend that we don't know what we are called to do. But friends, let's be honest, we're afraid. We're afraid, and rightly so. It's scary. The truth is, we don't know what someone who we let in could do. We don't know what they're planning to do. We don't know what the future would hold, but friends, we never do. Part of the freedom that God gives us to live in this world means that we never know what a day is going to bring, but we do know this, that the hour for serving as Christ commanded is right now. Not waiting for tomorrow, but reacting today. As Christians, we bemoan the fact that young people don't seem to want to have anything to do with the church. We shake our heads and we look down our noses at them and we say, well, what's wrong with them? What don't they get? But friends, take a look in the mirror. Here we have been given a moment, an opportunity to show the people of this world what it means to lead with love, to not let fear overcome our faith, to stand up when we want to sit down, to speak out when we want to be silent, to dream when we want to just stay asleep. Here we have been given a moment, and we are throwing it away. Love means risk. Not unthoughtful risk. Not risk without any precautions. But risk. When we have questions as people of faith, we are called to err on the side of love. Full stop. And if we could embrace that, friends, it would change this world. Fortunately for us, even if we can't seem to extend grace to our brothers and sisters, God extends grace to us. The scribes and the Pharisees have dragged this woman before Jesus. They have given their command to them, their challenge to Jesus. They've said, "Here, this woman has been caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, according to the law, Moses commanded that we stone such women. What do you say?" And we're told that Jesus looks down and he begins to write on the ground. We have no idea what he was writing or why he was doing that, but we have a guess, friends. Maybe, just maybe, he was ashamed. Maybe he was embarrassed by these people who were a part of the same faith he was, who are treating this woman like she was an object and not a human being. And they kept challenging him, "What do you say? What do you say? What do you say?" Until finally Jesus stands up and he looks them in the eye and says, "Let anyone among you who is without sin cast the first stone." Let anyone among you who is without sin cast the first stone. And one by one, they left. Until finally it was just Jesus and this woman. "Woman," he says, "where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" "No man, Lord." "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Friends, this is our story. This is the human story. This is the story of human experience. It is the story of human imperfection being met in the only way it can, by divine grace. It is the gospel in miniature. It is the way that we understand who Jesus is, who we are called to be. It frees us from the burden of judgment and releases us from the albatross of perfection. Friends, this is the gospel in miniature. It is our story, and it deserves to be shared, and it almost didn't make it in to our Bibles. You see, this story isn't in the earliest versions of the Gospel of John that we have. In fact, it doesn't show up until the late 2nd or 3rd centuries, 200 or 300 years after Jesus walked this earth. And we have no idea why. It could be that it was shared in oral form and then finally written down. It could be that it was taken out early and then only put back in. We actually have no idea. All we know is this: there came a moment when we realized this story needed to be told. 200 or 300 years after Jesus walked the earth, there came a moment when they must have recognized that in the face of human perfection, we need a promise of God's grace. Friends, we are 20 centuries after Jesus walked the earth, and we need the same thing. This is our story. It is our promise. It is the promise of grace, a grace which says there is nothing you can do or say to lose the love of God. Nothing. We have it. Jesus meets this woman not just where she is, but he meets her also where she wants to be. As Howard Thurman says, he meets her and he believes her into the fulfillment of her possibility. He sees her for her potential. He places a crown over her head, which for the rest of her life she will keep trying to grow tall enough to wear. It is Thanksgiving Sunday. And if we're looking around our world and we're wondering what it is we have to be thankful for, friends, it is right here, because we have also been given a crown to grow into. We have been given a crown of grace, not anything that we did to earn it. We didn't do anything to earn it, and we can't do anything to take it away. We have it, and now we have to live like it matters. Now we have to live like the grace of God matters. Friends, Thanksgiving is a time for grace. But the good news of our faith is that any day that we experience grace is worth giving thanks for. Let us not wait 4 days. Let us not wait one day. Let us not wait one moment to share the grace we have been given. There's plenty to go around. Amen.